welcome to your Directors Club of America podcast and backstage pass to the biggest names in the game, the power players. I'm Jennifer Gilhouse, your co-host along Kai Lacroix. Today, we invite you to listen to a conversation with Rob Oosterhuis. He's the general manager and COO at Royal Palm Yacht and Country Club in Boca Raton, and he's on the board of directors at the Club Managers Association of America. Enjoy this episode and make sure to subscribe. And if you want to keep the conversation going, we invite you to follow us on LinkedIn, comment on our post, and let us know what you think. Remember, no filter needed. Enjoy. Hey, we got Rob Oosterhuis. Am I saying it right? Oosterhuis. Almost had it right. Welcome to Power Players. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
We're excited to have you. Kyle and I have a bunch of questions for you, and we can't wait to dig in. I'm going to let Kyle start this off because I know he's got probably more questions than I do. So let's start, Kyle. You shoot first.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jen. So, Rob, welcome to the podcast. You serve on the board of directors for the CMAA, the Club Managers Association of America. I know you were just appointed earlier this year. Congratulations on that. And that leads me to my first question, which we're just going to jump right into the deep end of the pool.
Let's go.
I get this question a lot from some of my clients, which is, why is there such a variance in levels of GMs around the country? There's usually two. There's the one type of GM that you would do anything for, you love, he inspires, you would run through a wall for him, everybody loves him. And then there's that other level of, you question all your life decisions and you want to pull your hair out because he or she drives you absolutely mad. So why is there such a variance in levels of GM? When you go to GM University or wherever you go to, do they only give you two tracks? Like, do they only give you, hey, you can be the greatest GM, or hey, you need to make everyone's life miserable and be a terrible GM? What's the deal with that? Why is there such a huge variance?
Probably part of the problem is there's not a GM university. So you kind of learn in different ways. When you and I were together a few weeks ago at the DCA retreat, we had a kind of a wide variety of racket professionals in there, a few GMs as well. I think, again, it's a tough question. I would say it's not fair, but it's not fair. It's not the right answer. I think people come from so many different tracks. I think back in the day, things have changed a lot too. I think back in the day, private clubs probably started with, people who'd been some sort of hotel professional or food and beverage professional. And food and beverage was the main track. And I was in hotels, worked for Four Seasons for almost 15 years. And again, you can make all the jokes you want. Like, I was the golf guy. So again, just for the listeners, like, I have a PGA background. I came through the golf track. I'm a little unusual, not as unusual as it probably was 20 years ago to have a PGA background person be the GM. But when you're in the hotel world, it's all these men and women who've gone to hotel schools, and it's like, roll your eyes when you hear about the Swiss or whatever hotel school that they went to. And it was like, yeah, I got it about food and beverage. Tell me more about wine. And so then,
please do, by the way.
I would say, if you want to ask me about my weakness, this sounds like the bougiest thing you'd ever say. It's, what's your weakness? Well, it's wine, because it really is. I just barely know which end of the bottle to open. Champagne's another story, though. I think then you started getting people going into private clubs, and I think there was probably what I would call maybe more of a maitre d' approach to being the GM. You were there strictly for servicing the membership, and it was still, the customer was always right, and it was the members first, and you didn't have that, what some people might refer to as like a Disney mentality that had come in, or I think as Disney got replaced by companies like a Zappos or someone who you look at where the feedback, the input of the associates, of the employees, the team, whatever term you like to use, I think that became a little more in vogue. Now, again, that's still probably the outlier, but I think more and more people are trending that way. And so I think it's tough, because I think there's no GM that sets out to be the bad version of the GM that you're talking about. I think what can happen, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't moments where that I get on that edge or that precipice of, just make people happy, do whatever they say kind of thing, instead of what's the right thing to do, and use that as your guiding star. Because I think when you get caught up, it's a cliche from a movie. And again, I think Kyle, you probably maybe heard me say this. I manage my movie quotes, so I love just throwing out stuff. But it's one of those things where I think sometimes people get so caught up in keeping their job that they forget to do their job. But I think forget about it societally, but I think it's the right thing to do to make sure that people come into work and that they feel like that they're going to a place that they want to be a part of. They want to be a part of a team. They want to be part of this sounds very, very biblical, but they want to be part of a higher, bigger thing. And again, I'm not saying we're hitting that every day, but I think you could sit here and try and break it down. It's empowering people to make the decisions. It's not, we're working in a culture of fear. I've got a bunch of things I write up on my board just over time that I like to think of. To me, fear is an innovation killer, because what it is, people caught up in, well, if I do this and it doesn't work out, the membership is just going to dump on me. So safe play, status quo. My boy, Chris Markison, who's a general manager at Mesa Verde Country Club out in Costa Mesa in Orange County, California. He and I got to know each other a little bit, but then when I interviewed him, he became my assistant general manager at Sherwood when I was in Southern California. And he was during the interview process, the questions came up about trying to innovate and trying to grow business segments and development. He said the greatest foe is the status quo. And again, it's so easy just to become the person who says, just keep the train on the tracks, keep the inmates in their rooms and not going wild. And over time, I just want to speak for myself, but what I think probably happens with people is over time, that just takes a little bit out of you each day. There's certainly there are clubs that have really bad governance too, where whether it's the governors themselves are beating down the leadership and they just get beaten down, or sometimes it's the membership bubbling up and then the governance still doesn't do anything to stop the treatment of the employees, the general manager, or the atmosphere of the club. And it just starts breaking down the collaborative efforts that go on. Besides that fear being an innovation killer, you get clubs that have this culture of credit or blame. When something goes right, they always want to know who it is. They're hoping it's their favorite manager, their favorite bartender, their favorite golf pro. And then, when something goes wrong, somebody wants a head. And again, I'm not even talking about big things. I'm talking about a golf tournament format didn't turn out well, or something went wrong with a menu at an event. A long way of saying, I think you've got to figure out where your line in the sand is as a general manager. I heard that I was at CMA conference. I'm going to say this was at San Francisco in probably 2018-ish, somewhere in there. And I remember a woman standing up saying this, and this took a lot of heart to ask the question we had a keynote speaker, and I think this session didn't have the largest room, but she was in our biggest room, but so several hundred people. And she said, I'm a new GM and I'm in this room, I'm in the boardroom, and she's asking this female CEO leader, what do I do? Because I don't want to speak up because I'm a new GM and I'm a female. And she didn't even get the question out. And the speaker said, stop, you're in the room and you're in that seat for a reason. They're putting in that seat for a reason. And it was powerful. At that time, I'd probably been less than 3 years, maybe probably 2.5-ish years in my role as a general manager at a member-owned club, which was my first member-owned club. I'd been in the private space, but more in resort and in a transition in a private single owner environment. And it was funny because then the person asking the questions tried to say, no, you don't understand. She said, no, I do understand. But again, for me, it crystallized and galvanized that if you're going to sit there and you're going to wait until the time is right, it's just like when people say, well, I'm not ready to have kids. Well, P.S. If you wait until you're ready to have kids, we'd be extinct. Nobody's ready to have kids. I think the people that I look up to are the people that we can, and this is, I don't want to sound like we're bullies or super women and super men. Like you have to, because you have to be collaborative. You have to be articulate. Data has become more and more of a tool that general managers use. And it's easy to get deflated and defeated when you go into a boardroom. You have a great presentation, you've got your bids, you've got your data, and then 2 or 3 board members just say, no, nobody's going to like that. Or no, I spoke to a lot of people. That's one of my favorite things. Like, I know a lot of people, they're telling me. Then you kind of have to keep going back at it. Sometimes you don't get it on the first try, and then you have to keep going back at it and back at it and back at it. I wish I had the answer, Kyle, the real answer, because if I had the recipe to the secret sauce, then I think the club industry, I think, is a wonderful industry for people to work in. We're going through challenges, so just like every other hospitality industry, of attracting people and keeping people. But I think the great clubs, and I don't mean, too often people confuse great clubs with the great building or the amazing tennis facility or the exceptional golf course. That's not a great club. Those aren't the places I look to work. When I have people getting into the business asking me about what I would recommend, what I look for, I say the top 3 things I look for in a club are governance, governance, and governance. And really what I mean by that, just so everybody's clear, like 15 years ago, if you asked me about governance, I didn't know what the word meant. I literally had no idea. Kyle, I might have said this when we were talking a few weeks ago. I literally had no idea what the word governance meant. It didn't mean anything to me. Coming from working as a golf instructor, then a golf professional, worked for a resort company, it didn't really mean anything. But, in governance, in terms of the strength and of your board of governors, how do they rule equitably and appropriately, how do your committees function? So I think there are some great GMs out there. You can pick tons of people. You can't drive 5 minutes from here and not find some great GMs who set up great governance. And really what I mean by great governance is everybody there's roles and responsibilities. Everybody has a lane. The clubs I've seen have great success, and we do it here too, is you have a decisions chart, or you have a roles and responsibilities chart. And here's your board, here's your club president, here's your board, here's your general manager, here's your department heads, here's your committees, and that's it. Maybe there's something else. And what's your role in this thing, in the budget? Okay, the board president has no single role in it. The board approves the budget. The finance committee recommends it for approval. The staff works in concert with the finance. So I think those clubs that have that do really well. Eben Malloy, who's the GM over here at Woodfield, he talks about governance, and he said bad governance it's not a sign of committees. I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's not really a sign of the committees overreaching or poor membership leadership. He says it's a sign of bad leadership from the club. You start to let the committees make decisions and things like that. And I like, Kyle, your question, I've gone on for way too long about it, but you could chop it up any part. You're talking about the operations, you're talking about the decision-making process.
Okay, so let me stop you there then. And I happen to know that you are a great GM.
Spread that rumor.
Just from personal view, and I gladly will. But it's just from my interaction with you, it's from my experience, a lot of your staff, a lot of the that I've been to the facility. It's definitely on a very high level, and you're firing at all cylinders. But you mentioned something earlier in your answer, which is you don't get it right all the time. So what I want to know is, what was your biggest mistake as a GM, and how did that change?
I think fortunately, I haven't had any things that I look at as monumental mistakes. I think I just learned. I probably have a short-ish memory in that I don't beat myself up for too long about it. It definitely goes away in the memory bank.
You need to.
No,
you need to.
But it's like
It's so much.
Yeah,
You gotta let things go.
You have to, because you'll literally drive yourself insane. And hopefully we all have, whether it's a, husband, wife, partners, whatever, some friend. Again, it doesn't matter who it is that you can go to and talk, because sometimes when you're in the middle of the blender, you can't see things clearly. And for me, when I go, whether it's, again, I have industry colleagues, I have my wife, fortunately, I've even developed to the point now, and again, I think our governance is getting to a point where it's getting so strong. There are a number of our board members I can go to with a challenge and start to say it. And I like to think that I'm maturing to the point where most of the time, as I'm about halfway through saying it, I go, okay, I think I already know the answer here, and I already feel better about this. But I think probably just the big mistakes I made, it ties into your previous question, Kyle. It has to do with not, I don't want to say putting my foot down, but not really just speaking up when governance isn't going right. Again, there's I've been lucky, again, no monumental things, but I think probably more on the committee side when I've maybe throw every now and then you want to say you want to be collaborative, but don't throw in the towel. And probably there have been some times it's fine, just let them let them have it the way they want it, even though it's not the way it should be. Probably there were some of those times. Um, and again, that was probably just to think I haven't made too many of those mistakes in recent times. Sherwood, I made plenty of mistakes for sure. It just again really understanding the committee system. Um, but I think probably where again it's not sexy, it's not an exciting answer, but probably the mistakes have been about communications, not explaining to a committee why we're doing something, a board why we're doing something, and the membership why we're doing something. You know, I can remember a time we had a person who was sort of a mid-level manager who had left but had been at the club for a long time. And I didn't communicate it to the board that they were leaving until it was right before. And again, this is one of those things where you create these stupid realities in your head. And I thought this person was going to be better off going to this other facility where they were going to. But I was also concerned that the board was going to try and talk me into keeping them, paying them more, doing whatever, which again, without getting into all the details, just to me would upset the ecosystem and the balance of what we were doing. And so I had a couple board members say something like, yeah, they didn't tell me about this. And so again, in my mind, it was like, oh, they want to argue about, or not to argue, but they wanted to make this pitch about why this person should stay and we should pay them more, we should do it. And really all it was, hey, it's a senior leader. We just want to be informed. You can tell us if you're fine with them going, you've got a plan, we're behind you, but just communicate to us. And it sort of, it happened similarly at another facility where I was, and we had a person leaving, pretty high profile position. This person who I'm still friendly with today, this incident caused a little bit of a rift where they were leaving, but they didn't really want to leave, but they just wanted more money to stay. And basically the answer was, no, we're not there, but let's talk about how we can get there for you. And then, at least in my reality, they started trying to go through the board and the committee system to say, hey, I'd really like to stay. But I'm like, whoa, and to me, that's another one of those things where you talk about those GMs that get challenged is they don't lay out. Again, it's not laying down the law. It's just laying out, here's what we do. Here's how things go. And if you don't like it, here's your process, but we're not going to adjudicate this through the membership, through the committees, through the board, that type of thing. But so I think just the communication piece, again, it's not the sexiest answer. But I think just where I've failed has been to not communicate expectations or really where we're trying to get to, or if somebody's been, not meeting the expectations that we have for them as being part of the team, and I haven't communicated that to them, that's probably been a challenge. I think grown is having more of those conversations, but also having more of those conversations with board leaders, committee leaders, even members at times. And I love to quote people in movies, but Chris Markson, who I mentioned, like we had a few challenging members at Sherwood, and again, like every club does this, and there's no different. And again, some of it was they were challenging, not even through anything that we'd done. There had been the club was relatively young in terms of being member owned, and we just had done a huge renovation. There'd been a lot of change in a short period. So again, memberships and clubs a bore a change. But I remember Chris talking about some of these people, and we're just sitting there trying to strategize. And he goes, these guys are a challenge, but we're going to go at them. I'm going to kill them with kindness, and we're going to go at them. And I will, to his credit, he turned around every single one of those guys to, at worst, just got them to be the neutral member that you want. Just they show up, they enjoy the club, and they go home. And at best, there were a couple of guys who I would have bet, oh, I would have gone all in. I would have called and for take out a bigger mortgage on my house to say that guy's never turning around. And he did it. But I think but again, that just goes back to the communication where you label someone as this guy's miserable or she's a nightmare and she's never going to turn around. And again, I think those are the mistakes you make where you just try and put a permanent label on someone. Now, again,
Yeah.
sometimes people will earn that permanent label, but I think we have to be the constant. We have to be the calm one. You have to be non-emotional in that sort of sense to go at it. I like to say I get mad, really mad once a year and like blow my top. And I think I'm on like a pretty good, at least at work. I've got kids, so that's a different story, but I'm going on a pretty good run.
We're going to get to that.
Run.
We're going to
Yeah.
get to that.
That's pretty good. I mean, I try to have a lot of compassion for GMs because I know that they're getting it from food and beverage, from golf, from sailing, from tennis. It's all the feedback, and sometimes it's a lot of feedback to handle. So I try to keep that in mind as much as I can.
So let me just pause there. Sorry, Darren. I think that my message to, if there's anybody who's not a GM, and hopefully we as GMs give a lot of grace to people, have a lot of understanding, but I think that tends to flow better downhill than it does uphill. So one of my right-hand people, I'm lucky to have a couple, actually about 4 of them. We were talking about one of our other senior leaders who they were having some challenges with their team. And we talked about the fact that things were turning more positively. But part of that was there was some of those people, the hourly staff and the junior leaders there were giving a little more grace to this leader, to trying to understand what they're trying to do and get done. And again, it's super easy to be the Monday morning quarterback. If I was GM, here's what I would do. It's like, okay. It reminds me too, again, for everybody who thinks that they're already doing that job or they're already doing what's doing. When I was a head golf professional, TPC I was at 4 Seasons in Dallas. I can't even remember what flag it's flying now, but TPC 4 Seasons in Dallas, in Irving, Las Colinas. And we had a director of golf who was our senior leader. And I remember starting to look at, as 4 Seasons was opening resorts and I knew director of golf positions were coming open. And I said to him, like, we're a dynamic facility. We're the biggest golf facility in the company. We do more rounds of golf. We have the resort. We've got corporate business. We've got all this stuff. I said, I'm already way ahead of these other guys in the company who are directors of golf at these smaller places like that we had in Mexico or Nevis, or I'm trying to even think where, but like kind of these smaller spots. And I remember he said Paul Ernest, who was the director of golf, is now general manager at PGA headquarters at Fields Ranch in Frisco. And he said, it's a lot different when you're the one sitting in that chair. And I just, being the number one, it doesn't matter how big your operation is when you're the number one. And fast forward, he probably said that to me in about 2003, he probably said that to me. And then fast forward to 2016. And I remember being my first month at Sherwood was GM. And I remember thinking, oh, we need to tell somebody about this. And I started looking around. I'm like, oh, wait, I am that somebody. Like now you're the one sitting in that chair. And it's very different no matter what department you think you've led. So anyway, sorry, Jen, I cut you off.
No, I just wanted to kind of follow up on, I was working my way there to what you were saying about committees and how to handle, I guess their ambitions and how much input and how much impact they want to have in the decision-making process. How do you determine when it's time to your
ambitions is such a good word. I haven't used that word, but I'm going to use it now. That's really good. I think this starts at the top with the board. So hopefully the board is setting out at least some brand goals or some statements for where we're trying to go. Now, our board is a very big picture in the best possible way. We try and look, again, this is about constants. The constants should be at your facility, should be ideally the GM and then some of the senior leaders. And we all know still senior leaders can evolve over time. So we really try and work with the committees. So let's say your committee, for the sake of working on a calendar year, say your committee year ends in December. Ideally, like in October, you're working on the goals for next year's committee, right? And so that then those can get presented to the board in October, November. They can push it back to the committee and say, we really like you to focus a little more on this. And again, you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but it's more about, to me, it's more about focus, right? Where do we want your focus to be? So I think you get that done. I think one of the mistakes that I've seen at clubs, and again, like I said here, I'm going to start rattling off all kinds of mistakes now, Kyle. But one of the mistakes that we made, I made it sure what I made here, was you would start the year, you'd start the year in January, and your first committee meeting, you start talking about goals, and then you go back and then you try. So by the time you really had your goals crystallized, it was March. And which, if you're at a seasonal club, PS doesn't work so hot. Like, because again, for us, the way our committee year works, it really starts sort of beginning of November as the new committees start. And if you don't have your goals firm by then it's really bad, because then you're running into holidays and some committees might not be able to meet. And all of a sudden, if your committee goals aren't crystallized by February, it's okay, you got 3 months before a third of the club is gone. So I think trying to have goals, and I would say we'd go with a 2 assistant GM system. I'll pick Brianna Pastano, who oversees all our food and beverage, but our house committee, which is looking at our social events and our food and our dining experience for the members. They really hone in on what are the goals that are, so they're always checking back. Our golf greens and grounds committee does that really well, just like everything. Okay, are we focused on our goals? Okay, very good. They all do really well with action items. The worst thing anybody can have on a committee agenda is open discussion. Like, you may as well just write in complete free for all.
Oh my God, yeah. Because also people tend to be self-serving,
Do they?
like very work their own, what affects their own interest,
And so we've tried to, especially I think food and beverage, you run into it. And again, food and beverage is, you just be happy that you pick Rackets, although I know Rackets has its certain challenges as well. Yeah, I don't want to say, self-serving sounds a little darker. Yes, it is self-serving, but I think it's whatever I think people, high 90%, 99-ish% people are going in there trying to get something done. When I'm talking about the volunteers, trying to get something done that they think is in the best interest of the club. And again, sometimes they're wrong. And again, I think that's up to us as leaders to keep hitting them with the data, whether it's the nightly surveys you do, it's the general survey that you do, it's the industry information that you have at your fingertips. So I think that I'm trying to think exactly. I really need to reach back out to him when we just hired a new director of golf last year, and I was calling on he was a head pro. I was calling on his director of golf for a reference, and so we had a long discussion. And again, I love talking to people at other clubs, because I'm just trying to pull the best practices from other things. And so this director of golf was basically telling me, I said, tell me about your committees, because I was more trying to see how does this person work in committees. And then they started talking about their committee system, and he said, we talk about, oh God, I need to find this because it's such a good quote. It's basically like, we don't have suggestions. We talk about ideas and concepts or something. It was much crisper with the way he said it, but basically it was like, we don't open up this Pandora's box every meeting. Like, we'll say, okay, we'll get this on the agenda for next time. And again, it's really key. I think the committee members, again, I'll pick on food and beverage because it's an easy one, they told me their steak was undercooked. This is the bad version of it. And you go, really? They've been out of town for 10 days. Yeah, this was a couple weeks ago. So I said, guess how useless that information is to us. Again, you try and say it in a slightly nicer way, but you also try and set those up early in the committee year of, here's what we're going to do. If somebody has an issue, really encourage them to talk to us. We do, hopefully everybody does this in most of the departments, but we have a nightly report that goes out. We do it in golf. We do it in every one of our restaurants, where it's our casual 19th hole, our poolside restaurant, our main dining. We do a closing report on every event. Our youth manager does a closing report. It's just about communicating. Yes, there's some data in there, but it's also just about, hey, here's some things that went really well today. Here's something that went wrong. So we can just kind of raise that flag up. As it pertains to the committees, like, we really try and encourage members to talk to us. When it's tough, because you get every club's the same. Like people, I shouldn't say every club's the same. Some people don't mind being the complainer, or they wear it as a badge of honor. But a lot of people, especially at our club, are saying, I don't want to be a complainer. And again, I wish we'd have members listening to this. We're not going to spit in your food. I promise you. Tell us tell us about your experience. I, I tell people, the worst thing you can do is go away mad, go away quiet and mad. And as I say, we're not going to pitch a perfect game ever, but we're going to try to. And we're going to try to do that each and every day. I love suggestions from members. One of our oldest members here is a sweetheart of a guy and doesn't talk a whole lot. And when he does, I listen. And then he said, I want to tell you something, but you get plenty of people in your ear. I said, how about we make this deal? I promise you that I'm going to listen to you, and you promise me that you're going to understand if I don't do anything about what you're going to tell me. And he said, that's fair. And so he made it. He actually told me 3 or 4 things. A couple of them were fantastic ideas, and we implemented them right away. I say it to employees all the time too. We have an orientation, and they're touring a new person around. I'm about 15 feet away from the HR office, so I'm one of the first stops, and I always try and get to know them, tell me where you're from, background, where's your family, blah, blah, blah. A little bit of get to know you, but then I'll just say, hey, you can always, now you know where my office is, you can always come here. But the first question I'm going to ask you is, did you talk to your boss? Did you talk to your boss's boss? Did you talk to HR? I said, I'm the last stop, right? When there's a real big problem. But what I will tell you is, if you have an idea that you see that you think we can improve things, whether it's for the employees, whether it's for the members, whatever, service, facilities, anything, I go, your obligation to us is to tell us. I said, now don't get down if we don't do anything about it, but please tell us, because the worst thing you've done is you planted a seed. Or maybe you're going to reinforce something that we've been hearing. Again, you want those fresh eyes to give you the feedback.
So, yes. So Rob, you mentioned something there that I think is really interesting. And it was a little while ago about, GM's got a lot of things thrown at them. We don't always see the full picture. It sort of reminds me of like the sword of Damocles, right? Where you have this amazing, powerful king, and you have his servant, and the servant is like, oh my goodness, king, everything you could ever imagine. And you have this incredible life. And the king says to the servant, you know what? Why don't you take my seat for a day? So the servant takes a seat for the day. And then next thing you know, he looks up, and right above his head, a few inches away, is this sword dangling, hung by a single forced hair, and it could drop at any minute. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of miss the boat. But from your case, how much of your day is spent on strategy, and how much of it is spent on putting out fires?
Yeah, it's
because you do become a firefighter.
it depends.
You do become a firefighter. You're doing this.
It depends on the day. So let's talk about today.
Let's talk about it.
So today, to me, this call with you, this podcast with us is strategic. This is strategic because it allows me to spend a little more time with you. It allows me to try and be a little more thoughtful and mindful about some of the things I'm doing. I mean, you guys are going to ask me some questions, and there are already 3 things that I've thought of that since we've been talking. After this, I'll be having a meeting with our director of HR and our CFO. It's sort of a strategic planning thing in terms of how we're doing a few things financially and with some staff. Again, all positive, but just strategic. Then after that, I'm going to see how fast I can drive across town to Del Rey and watch. You'll appreciate this. This is not planned, I swear to God. But today is the last day of our women's league. I won't get into the whole alphabet soup of it, but one of our teams is in second place. They're 1 point behind the first place team, and they're playing somewhere else. So I'm going to go over there to support them. And again, that's strategic in the sense of, I want them to show them how much what they're doing means to us. We had a town hall meeting last night, which was about trying to add permanent pickleball courts and turn our multi-use, multi-line tennis courts back into just tennis courts. Well, that was obviously very strategic. This week's been almost all strategy. It's been all prepping towards that town hall. But I think it's strategic, not just to get more racket sports. It's strategic because we have data that shows we have people that the majority, half of the new members that have joined are playing actively in tennis. A third of them are playing on teams. We've had 6 people who played as non-member substitutes on teams that have turned into members in the last 2 years. I think you want to keep trying to nurture that garden where it is and supporting those teams. That's strategic. Then I'll get back here. Then we do a bi-weekly meeting with director of HR, the 2 assistant GMs. We're talking just operationally and people. This is a good strategy day. This sounds way better than normal. And then between about 1:30, I'll be running over to just to say hi to all of our men and ladies. We've got our Women's Golf Association versus our Men's Golf Association fun battle that they do at the end of the season. So again, I guess that's all strategic. Like, it's strategic in the sense that I want them to see how important what they're doing is to me. It's strategic in that I just want to get eyeballs on a little bit of the operation just to see, how things are going. Again, and it's from the detail of, all right, how's everything organized, cart signs, everybody's name spelled correctly, down to does everybody have a name tag on, stuff like that, to I want to make sure I accidentally on purpose run into this member and talk to them about that one thing. And then this is probably a better day for strategy. Then there are some fires, and we've got a couple disciplinary issues on the membership side that we're dealing with. Again, nothing dark. It's just little rules. I say disciplinary. That sounded way too dark, but more just following rules and stuff and playing nice. And because every now and then you get the darkness. And then so there's a little bit of that. And then I've got penciled in some free time, which I know what I'm going to fill with that. And again, I don't know where emails fit in on strategy versus fires. But yeah, so again, I like to think that everything's very intentional. I've talked about this recently. I try and do things with a lot of intent, like the way I pick out my clothes, the way I plan my day, the way I'm, when I'm going to have lunch. I always think of like a 50-hour work week. And again, hopefully, great thing is I see people, leadership roles, trending to a less than 50-hour work week. It's a little tougher sometimes when you're in the world like some of you and your colleagues are, where it's, if you take days off or hours off, you're costing yourself. Again, this is a former recovering golf instructor.
Yep.
When my first job, I think I started March 1st, and then I went on vacation late August, and between that time, I took 3 days off, because you took time off. It was like, then you're definitely not making money by doing that. Again, that's why we like you, because you have that background of, you are a chief professional. Essentially, you understand the value of time and money. And with that being said, let's get into money. Why is our racket sport industry so underpaid? Well, what can we do? What can we do as an industry, as professionals, and what can the club management side do to kind of bridge that gap? Because we are severely underpaid, at least the vast majority of us. Yeah, again, like we probably sit here for hours of me asking you to define why you're underpaid. What does underpaid mean? So without even putting that label on it, I would start asking people, how can you show more value, and how can you prove more value? What are there ways that you can earn more money? To me, it was, again, this is a low level, but as a golf instructor, first of all, it was availability. So my teaching book was blocked out. Okay, so I know I'm not making money there. Now, I think hopefully the hospitality industry as a whole, it probably has. I think there's still pockets at my club where we're challenged to have good life balance. So for me, it was what I would try and use data. Again, if I was a rackets professional, and again, it doesn't matter whatever position you are. I think sometimes we can all think that we're underpaid. Again, the same thing goes for GMs. You start doing some research. I think sometimes we latch on to whoever makes the most money in that position and go, that's what I should be getting. And maybe that's the case. I think there are clubs. To me, it's ass backwards, because like in California, there are clubs that are higher volume revenue, bigger footprint, more members, and you get these ridiculous taxes, and you can make more money in Florida.
Yeah.
and cash to cash. Forget about taxes and forget about how much it costs to buy a home and raise kids. Um, but I don't think that Florida's got it wrong in paying too much. I think California's now starting to realize, and again, I don't know if that's trickling down to the golf professionals, the tennis professionals, and the other leaders. Um, California's got it way wrong. But again, I think that it was like, you could say there was this paradise tax on why everything costs so much to live. But I think also by the same token would say, well, it's California. It's awesome. You get to live here. It's, man, at the end of the day, it's like food on a plate. It's paying for a college and a wedding and all the things. For rackets professionals, I would want to know more about just the industry as a whole, try and get more educated on what's going on nationally, try and get educated on what's going on regionally. And then once you've got that data and you can tell you can say to yourself, you can look in the mirror and go, yeah, I'm a little underpaid. Then I think then you've got to start having the hard conversations with yourself, or not hard, just the candid conversations. I think sometimes we can be our own worst critics and sometimes we can be blind to our blind spots. And sometimes it can be difficult to ask a GM to say, look, I want to make more money. Here's what I think. Is there can you help me out? But I don't know. Although I feel like there's a lot of hormones in that room with all those tennis pros and the DCA. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of fear, but I guess because you're still on the court so much, like you guys think you're like just a couple bad shots away from making it into the first round of Wimbledon or something. But don't worry, golfers are worse. It was like, oh, if only my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle. But I think you got to be willing to have those conversations and try to understand a little bit more. There is some, and again, I can't speak for any club. I'm not saying this is for me, but I think you get some clubs that where you're going to get GMs that get intimidated by the golf pro or the tennis pro. They're popular. People have a good time when they're playing golf. They're having a good time when they're playing tennis. The tennis, they're usually athletic people. They're getting invited to all the holiday parties. So the GM has to be the bad guy or girl. But and again, we all know that's like when you're inside of it, you all know you're as a rackets professional, as a golf professional, like it's every bit as difficult. But there's sometimes I don't want to use the word jealousy, but again, so when you're taking a look at the balance of things, sometimes you start to get rackets professionals, let's use those. They're going to be clubs where they start to, with a big enough tennis program, they're going to make more money or start coming on that GM's block in terms of the financials. And again, I don't have the right answer for that. I don't know what the right answer is. I will tell you, years ago, there was Four Seasons where I went and I was consulting on their golf program because it was very similar to the one that we were running when I was in Costa Rica. And I went to this facility and talking to the director of golf, talking to their head pro. And so we were in September, but I was talking about their teaching and they said, yeah, it's great. We teach them. We make a lot of money, but they say we're capped. And I go, what do you mean you're capped? I go, you can only teach so many lessons. They go, no, once we get to a certain dollar figure, we don't make any more after that. So I said, time out. So I go, what's your year run? And they said, it starts in January, ends in December. Guess what? This is a Caribbean resort. Guess when their busiest time is? December. So literally these guys were teaching free lessons in the month of December because they reached their cap. So I have
how's that even legal?
Well, I don't know. It's part of your job. Just say, look, it's part of your job. So you're salaried employees. You're going to do what we tell you to do. And I mean, nowadays, maybe a lawyer would have a field day with us. This was 20 years ago. But I remember talking to the GM and, about this. And he goes, they're going to make more money than the director of marketing. So tell him to go out there and teach. That's fine. If he's qualified to teach a golf lesson, let's go. So again, I'm looking through a different lens because I'm a golf professional. But to me, it's okay, are they taking care of their operation? Is the business in order? Are all the other golfers having a good time? And again, if they've thrown in the towel on the operation just to teach, that's problematic. I think the same thing, you could say the same thing nowadays. The way I've seen, talking with some of your colleagues, talking with Mark McMahon, who I think a lot of, talking with some of the other consultants in the industry, I think a lot of clubs are setting up, they're setting up their directors of tennis or directors of racket sports, a lot of these compensation packages, they're honing in on, we don't really want you on the court more than X amount of hours in private instruction. It was funny the first time I saw this, and again, this was Mark might have been the first person that told me about it. And I was like, damn, are you serious? We're going to tell these guys they can't teach? And, and I appreciate it, but I didn't understand. And then he talked me through it, and he said, well, keep in mind, they've got the team activities. So that's an element of on-court time. So they are there. And then you got your private instruction, your clinics. That's another bucket. And then you're going to have the administrative stuff. And you want to make sure that they're attending the meetings and everything like that. The more it came into focus, I understood it. But again, I think so many rackets professionals, I think, are going to have to overcome the misconceptions. And again, I think it goes back to the communication and the education. Start with the GM. Hopefully you can get him or her on your side. And again, you don't like it to be adversarial where it's this side or that side. Another way I like to do things at our club is to make sure that the membership knows the staff. And I don't just want the people who play tennis to know the rackets professional or our head person. And I don't want it just to be the rackets and wellness committee, even though you got a few people on there who don't even play tennis. They're more on the wellness side. For us, it's also about the board. So we try to, and frankly, the finance committee too. So whenever there's possible, when we've got like a finance project or like a capital project that involves those people, we try and get them there to come and deliver the message on that. Because it's fine for me to say, look, we've got these crappy above ground sprinklers on our hard true courts, but for them to come in and talk about the need for we got to get hydro grid. Everybody else has it. We're in the dark ages here. We're 20 years behind. Here's why. Let's talk about the costs. Here's what the other options are. Here's the downsides of those other options. This is what we really recommend. Is there a financial upside to this? Not really in the short term, but in the long run, we've now built the tennis program. We can call ourselves more of a tennis facility. And so you start to think that, again, it's overcoming that stigma of it's a tennis pro. Again, like I did an interview probably a year and a half ago or so with the South Florida PGA. And I said, there were years where I was hiding like my PGA background because it was like, you go in an interview as a GM, that's the golf guy. Or I was trying to have take on these corporate roles. Even in golf, even if it was a golf corporate role, it was like, oh, it's the golf pro, as if I wasn't a business leader. I think that the rackets professionals, and again, I was so inspired being in that room at the DCA, listening to everybody talk. And I think it's also when you're around those like-minded people with the same backgrounds and you all have the same challenges and you can lean on one another. It's like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now too. You lift one another up. And I think that's where it's really important that there's some focus on trying to lift one another up. Not in terms of just the shoulder to cry on or let me share my program information with you, but I think the financial piece is important, but also just showing who you are. Again, if I was a director of tennis, I'd want to dump on a board or a GM and say, oh, this guy doesn't know anything. They don't know anything. You're right. They don't know anything. You just said it. So you've got to figure out ways to educate them. And, I think you asked me about my time on strategy. How much time do rackets professionals spend on strategy of their programming? I think a decent amount, but how much time do they spend on strategy of their professional development, bettering themselves, educating, even start with their colleagues around them. How much does the director of food and beverage know about what you do? How much does the director of golf know what you do? Again, I can think of plenty of controllers, CFOs who go, oh yeah, tennis, blah, 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 just copy and paste, maybe add a couple % from last year's budget. But if you're trying to add something to the budget, whether it's your compensation or the programming, you've got to get out there and you've got to advocate for it. It's not going to fall into your lap, I promise you. If I was a rackets professional or a golf professional, I felt like, again, you got to have this goes back to your first question, Kyle, you got to have the right GM who's going to support this. But you've got to hopefully you've got somebody who's a partner with you, and they're going to let you educate people, educate the board, educate the committees. I sit on almost most committee meetings. I'll go to every finance. I'll go to pretty much every golf committee. I go to half-ish of the probably rackets and wellness, some of the house, again, and part of it's just, again, I'm there, but again, strategic. I'm there not to run the meetings. I sit in the farthest corner of the table as you can. Hopefully my rackets professional is running the meeting, and whatever professional is running that meeting. And whatever they're not running, chair of that committee is running based off the agenda that has been put together by the staff with the staff member in concert. Circling back to your question about committees, that again, the agenda is key. We have a pre-agenda meeting. I've been on some of those even with whoever the staff leader is and the committee chair. We agree on what it is and we send it out, and that's the gospel. We got to run off of that. But I think no compensation was a big discussion at the DCA retreat. I'm sure I think it even came up a little bit. Probably came up at Racket X and some of the other sessions there. It's got to be brought to the forefront. We've got to lean on we got to stand on the shoulder of whoever the people are who we think are the ones, again, not just that you're making the most money, but the ones they're getting their benchmarks are right. What's the volume of revenue that they bring in? What's the volume of tennis? What's the volume of courts that they have? How many we talked so much about the different racket sports that they're running. What's their impact on the membership? If I was I think our rackets professionals I think they probably feel like they're pretty well taken care of. But if they weren't, like the town hall meeting we had last night, the presentation we gave, we showed that 6 people who played as guest subs on our league team have now turned into members. I'd be like, hey guys, can we talk about this $300,000 that I've brought in the last 2 years over here just on these 6 folks? And that's just initiation fees. I'm not even talking yet about, the dues. I'm not even talking about all the ancillary revenue. I'm not even talking about the intangible enjoyment these people have brought to the club.
That's really great.
Well, yeah, again, but everybody's going to make that argument. You're going to have your chef go, oh, look, they love the food, but you need to. I think those are positive arguments to have, but hopefully it's tough. We do try and look at like positions too. At Four Seasons, when I was, again, this is 20 plus years ago in Dallas, and they realized all of a sudden these salaries got out of whack, where it was like, okay, like I think at the time I was the outside golf service manager, junior manager, and I was getting this, but there was somebody who was like a front desk manager or assistant front desk manager who was getting me plus 25%. And again, I don't even know if that was the exact example, but people started to realize that, no, these guys they're doing a very similar job. So we try to look at bands and try to say, okay, well, who's doing what? And then there's some people that fall outside the bands when they have, I think, a director of golf, a director of rackets. They fall out, their base salary might fall in the band, because you might say, okay, you have a similar responsibility to this person. The rackets professional might make more because they have this opportunity to make more in the lessons. But I think, just again, gone on a long time on this, and this is like a 5-hour podcast if we were going to talk about this. Again, I'd want to talk to such smarter people, much smarter people than me. But again, I think that it's going to start with having a difficult conversation, and again, it's got to be couched in a way of, look, I love it here. I want to succeed. Here's what I'm seeing. What can you tell me? And hopefully you're with a GM who's, confident enough in themselves, who's not going to start comparing what that person's making to, what they're making. And again, if a GM plays their cards, they can probably go back to the board eventually, go, hey man, this correct is great, but I got to make more money than him. So maybe they both win. But again, I think it's just what have you done what are you doing that's additive? What are you doing that's new? If it's, have a good story. Have a good story.
I think the DCA has done it right, especially with the recent news of being recognized with education credits by the CMA. I mean, I'm a CMA dummy. Like, I don't know anything about it. Have never been involved with it. I'd never really had like a director take me under and tell me about it, or, why I should be interested in it. So this is all super new to me. And I think it's a great step forward for the whole rackets industry, because golf has such a huge presence there. And some kids.
Golf's not
barely.
too. I know golf's got a bigger seat at the table. PGA of America is a really strong organization. And unfortunately for racket sports, it's a little bit like boxing. You don't quite know who's in charge of what organization.
And no organization has ever been a part of it.
Yeah, and I think I've really been making a push for PGA professionals to get more involved in CMAA. I think the education's exceptional. That's not to say the PGA doesn't have some good education, but I think the breadth of CMA education is great. And it's not, I think for years, again, you say you're a CMA dummy, like, again, rewind to, May of 2009. I didn't know anything about CMA other than that I knew some other people were involved in it. And I literally just signed up. I'm like, okay. And then I read, I'm like, okay, so what do you do with this? All right, you're a member. And then you realize, oh no, the next step is to try and get your certified club manager status, your CCM. And so what do you have to do with that? Okay, this clock's got to tick for 6 years. Okay, can't do anything about that. And here's all the things I have to do. And I became obsessive about it, of like, okay, I have to get whatever it was, the 300 hours of education. I have to go to a world conference. I have to go to these 3 business management institute programs that are week-long programs. And I've got to go to another one. Either I've got to go to golf or recreation or food and beverage. Okay, food and beverage is my weakest spot. So let's go do food and beverage. And I became obsessed about it. And, oh, there's a webinar. Let me get on the webinar. Let me learn. And again, like back to what I was talking about governance, like it all of a sudden, oh, this is what governance is. Like that helped. I think CMA, as far as the thing with the education, I think it's, again, kudos to Jarrett, Chirico, Chris Gale, and everybody for pushing that along. And kudos to the CMA. Again, really, the CMA is just saying, hey, if you got this quality education, we want to recognize it. If there are CMA members who are part of DCA, or again, any organization, I think that's the thing that people don't realize. If you're whatever space you're in, if you're a chef or you're in the beverage side, beverage bad example, but because you're probably more steering towards CMA, but whatever your area is, the CMA is going to accept legitimate credits from whoever, and again, I said the eye-opening for me being at Racket X this year and being at the DCA retreat, and it's smaller versions of the PGA show that you get in Orlando and a much smaller version of the CMA World Conference, but the same kind of topics. We're all speaking the same language. I think that's the scary part. I don't know, maybe feel like you guys can disagree with me, although I think pickleball and padel have changed things a little bit for the worse, in the sense that I think tennis is more approachable. Like, it's understandable to a non-tennis player, whereas golf, I think, is really scary. I don't know anything about golf, because you forget about just playing. If you're a GM and you get to the agronomy side, that part's scary. So again, but I think we all are afraid of things we don't know about. Now I need to go look at wine because I'm afraid of wine. So I'll start learning about wine. But
yeah. Hold on. So you're on the CMA board, and based on that, being on the board of directors, what changes do you want to make? What changes do you want to make to the industry? What changes do you want to make that are going to have an impact on the industry and on yourself?
So great question. And I feel like this is like the setup for when you're trying to root out bad board members. It's the guy or gal who's, no new taxes, or build that wall, or do whatever. I think you want to be a shepherd as a board member. You want to shepherd along the right programs. For me, when I gave I guess it's a nomination speech, you'd call it, I talked a lot about education and really engaging with people no matter where you are. But those are a couple of my big things. I think that, but it's in engaging. It doesn't matter who you are or where you are. And if I just said who, that's a broad thing. To me, I was trying to talk to not just the CMA members. I was trying to talk to the rackets professionals and the golf professionals and the culinary professionals and the maybe even some of the human resource professionals, the finance professionals, the people who maybe haven't been super part of the CMA or even remotely part of the CMA. I want to make sure that you're welcome, that we're appealing to you. As I say, it kind of goes back to, it's not just about the person who graduated from hospitality school. The irony in this is my eldest daughter just graduated from hospitality school, so it sounds like I'm beating up on her. But you don't want to be. I hate being narrow in anything. My experience when I joined CMAA, and Jen, you talked about being a dummy to it, and I just said, okay, I'm going to start going to these CMA meetings that we had, that were the local stuff. But fortunately, being in Southern California, there was a lot of stuff. You had the things that were the broad chapter things, and you had the local being near LA where I was, there was a lot of stuff going on in LA, and seemed like there was always stuff in San Diego and Orange County. So if you're willing to drive 2 or 3 hours, you could get to a lot of things. Lo and behold, you start doing these things, you go into these things, you realize there's these cliques, right? And again, I don't think it's ill-willed, but it was like this group of GMs was hanging out with one another. And then my title was director of clubs because 4 Seasons, the GM is the person who runs the whole hotel and everything. So I was running a country club and a beach club, but they're like, we can't call you GM, so we're going to call you director of clubs. I'm like, okay, fine. Everybody knows I'm a GM. I don't really care. But then you start going, oh yeah, he's got a private club, but it's the resort guy. And again, probably some of this was my own insecurities. But so I just started butting into conversations. And then I also started the other thing is I started finding the orphans in the room. And when all of a sudden found like, oh, you're a GM, you happen to be a PGA pro. I didn't even know you through the PGA, but now I know you through CMA. And I know this other person who just came from the hotel background. And you start to meet these people and you start to develop your own groups. And it sounds super cheesy and corny, but it sticks with me the way going back to 2009, 2010, it sticks with me how I felt early on. And again, this sounds so altruistic, but I just don't like, it's no woman or no man left behind. I hate seeing people when they're sitting at a table by themselves, whether I'm going to sit down with them or I'm going to grab them to join the table, but where we are, it's even at the DCA, because you have this broad group of me at the international people, and some of the international folks were like, there's a tiny bit of a language barrier, and it's like, no, come on over here, speak whatever English you can. Yeah. I know you're getting what we're talking about. So I think you have to just push your way into some of those things, and don't let the conversation go on without you. I think it's easy to get discouraged, and it's okay to have those down moments, but I think just kind of keep building. Again, this is very much my experience, but I think hopefully being part of the CMA board, again, it sounds like I'm running for president. I want to unite people. Like I want to bring people together. I see it in a very practical way too. In a business standpoint is, how do you improve your business, grow your customer base? Okay, so there's 27,000 golf professionals over there who are in the PGA. Now, not all of them are a club that have a membership. Maybe they can't be a part of CMA, but say that's whatever, half of them. And, say you've got a few of them a bunch of them are just not going to be interested. And then you got a portion who are already members, but still you've got I promise there's several thousand people just in the PGA who could gain from that. And I think the misconception about the CMA is, I don't want to be a GM. That's fine. I've done plenty of, I don't want to be a rackets professional, but going to the DCA was super meaningful to me. I think that just people need to be open to education and improving themselves. If I'm a rackets professional, if I'm a golf professional and I'm trying to make more money, and I start to show my boards and my committees and my GM, hey man, I went to the CMA stuff. Look at all this education I did to better myself. And again, you still got to make sure you get your core job done. You can't be the person who does 8 million hours of education and fails at their job. But they're always, when I start to tell that, I always reminds me of this story that our English teacher told us in high school. He's I remember this student I had, they had great grades. They knew they were going to go to a great school. They started touring schools like late in their junior year. They got really focused, and all of a sudden they missed so much school. Their grades started dipping, and they couldn't get in any of those places. So focus on what your core thing is at hand, but make sure you're paying attention to everything else that's going on around you. And again, like the Florida CMA does a really nice job of, like, any of these big programs that we've got going, like kind of call it the half-day programs that we have going on. I can go and I can bring any 2 people as guests who aren't CMA members. And, we did that I think we did it last year, and we wound up taking I was trying to count yesterday, for 8 or 9 CMA members here. And I think last year we did that. I think we took 18 people to this one program. It's great. And we opened the eyes to a bunch of folks who maybe didn't know that much about it. But again, I think, I don't want to say one organization is better over another. I think there's so many great organizations out there. I wish Rackets would have an organization so we could all point to it, and I'll go to whatever.
It would be DCA.
I think the DCA, to me, I think it sounds like I'm a stuntman for the DCA, but unpaid. But I think the DCA is great because you've got these webinars that are so fantastic. They're so approachable. Everything, yes, I know a lot of them at their core have a rackets background, but you listen to some of the stories. I'm going to butcher her first name. Is it Danielle Bollettieri who spoke?
Yeah.
And then Todd, why am I blank on his name? The Australian guy with the,
Lee.
Todd,
Lee
yeah,
or
Lee.
Lee.
Those are great stories that anybody, and it doesn't matter. Yeah, sure. I think it's cool. I actually wish, I'm reading Todd's book right now, and I got about a third of the way through it. I'm really like dying from the name drop more, and he's not name dropping. It's killing me. Like I want to know stuff, but maybe he's gonna get.
I just interviewed him actually.
Yeah,
So,
no,
he's an interesting guy.
no, he's an interesting guy. But I would say, I think like anybody who was at DCA and heard him talk, you go, that guy's going through some stuff still, and that's 20 years in the past.
Oh, yeah.
And what I think to me, again, I like to think I'm a pretty compassionate person, not to a fault, but I think like listening to that kind of education, that guy's talking about a life story. Like it's
Right.
does it have a happy ending? I don't know. I don't think the ending's written yet.
Yeah.
Got a ways to go.
Well, I think a lot of times too, and why rackets doesn't have much of a presence is, we seem like we're a little scatterbrained, but it's actually our industry is a little different too, because tennis is international.
Yeah.
It's in public spaces. There's tons of public courts, schools. It's just more accessible. So there's different industries within the industry.
No, I talked about it. I think that I can't remember if I was when I was talking Racket X, but golf is there's just golf. Yeah, you can get into you got the Top Golfs and the Drive Shacks and the Pop Strokes, and there's that kind of thing. And you can have the places that are just the standalone ranges or the standalone teaching facilities. They don't really even have a golf course in the public and the private stuff like that. But at its core, golf is golf. You've got a golf club, you're hitting pretty much the same kind of ball for the most part. Like rackets, you got multiple sports now. Like that's why I say it used to be approachable, but now I think there's an intimidation factor of it's almost like technology. I remember being at Four Seasons and them corporate guys trying to pick out TVs or I think whatever they were going to use to host their TV platforms and digital platforms. And I remember talking to the guy who was at the time the COO, and he goes, Rob, because every time we think we've got something made, or a decision made, we realize that's somebody's passed that 6 months ago. And it's like rackets, it's developing so fast. At least from fast from the novice person's perspective. I was, speaking at Racket X, so I was speaking with another GM at a big club here in Boca, and then I'm blanking on her name, Jennifer, it'll come to me in a second, who started Park Padel in the Bay Area. And it's literally like this social padel stuff that goes on. It seems almost like pop-up, but it's so brilliant. It's brilliant. I hope it works. Who knows? Time will tell. But I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, are my members now going to ask for padel? Because we're trying to wedge in pickleball. God knows where padel's going to go. And
Padel's back. Just so
say that again. Bigger? Is that what she said?
Better.
Why? All right. Why is it better? Because I feel like I'm going to run into a wall at every second. Why is it better?
It's just, I just think it's more fun. I think pickleball's more friendly to the person that's not necessarily in rackets, but paddle is just more.
Let's call it what it is.
Exactly. It's like your Top Golf.
No, I hope it'll be interesting to
plus
see what Top Golf looks like in 10 years or so.
Well, I think for you too to understand the difference between padel and pickleball is really competing against everything. You can set up a pickleball court on an open tennis court, on a basketball court, in a parking lot. Padel has that sort of luxury proprietary feel because you have a court construction that you can't take that court in the back of your trunk of your car and set it up anywhere. It has to be set up appropriately. There's a luxury feel to it. It's the fastest growing sport in the world, and there's a reason for that. It's overtaken pickleballs, and it's definitely here in South Florida. I know there's about 16 clubs in Miami. They're building more, and the current clubs are already expanding. There's a beautiful club that opened up right up the street from us in Boynton Beach called Replay. It's taken off, and so that's kind of the feel. But I want to get back to something you said, because you mentioned your family a couple times, and you also talked about Todd Lee and how, he's sharing his personal story. I don't necessarily, I would like to hear a personal story, but just for constraint. But what I do want to know is, how do you balance the family with being the GM and COO of a big club in Boca Raton, along with being on the board of directors for the CMAA? How do you balance all that? What keeps you up at night, both personally and professionally? How do you manage that?
Well, fortunately, the question about CMA is a good question, because my first thing, when I reached out to a couple former CMA national board members, a couple former presidents actually, and said, tell me about this. And I said, don't tell me about when you're president, but tell me about just being a board member. And the great thing that CMA does is the way, especially now technologies too, that it's set up so that we really are meeting. We're meeting during our CMA conference. So if you're an active CMA member, you're going to that anyway. So that's not really any extra time away or anything like that. We've got National Committee Week coming up in a couple of weeks, so we'll have a meeting there. So if you're serving on a national committee, you're going to be there already. Then we'll do a summer board retreat. So that's a one outlier. And then we have, during our legislative leadership conference in the, I guess technically it's late summer, early fall, September, we'll have another meeting then. So they're piggybacking the in-person stuff with the stuff you're doing already. Because I was thinking like, geez, okay, if I'm going to do these things, plus I'm going to have to travel like 3 or 4 times a year, or what do you do? So it's set up pretty well that way. You're running chairing a committee. I'm blessed. I've got a great staff liaison who's helped me run the research committee, a guy named Amilcar Davey. And he's again, I'm trying to look at through, and I know it's not quite clubs, but in some ways, like it's his deal, and I'm there to help support. And I want to do it just like a good board president would do for him. So that's the time there. As far as work and just personal life, but I hope maybe you picked up on earlier, I use the term life balance, and I heard somebody, I totally ripped this off from somebody. Got to make sure I give them the right credit, but probably 10 years ago or 8 years ago, you started hearing the work-life balance. And like, no, work is part of your life, because that work-life balance, the guy explained, it's beautiful. It's like, it implies you've got work and then you've got life. So, okay, that's obviously not true.
Right.
I think I live on a calendar. I've got my work calendar, and then I've got, my personal, my Apple calendar, that's my calendar stuff. And so I have to merge everything. And then I've got, when any one of my kids are playing a league sport, then that calendar gets merged in. And so we kind of live that way. I don't have any secret sauce other than really trying to plan and prioritize. I think it's important. Again, 2014, I was working at Four Seasons Santa Barbara, and really made the decision then, maybe especially early 15, late 14, early 15. I had 3 sort of fork in the road, if you will. I could stay what I was doing. I was the director of clubs, really liked what I was doing, but I knew that financially you're going to be capped. And there's some other stuff going on, so I'm not really sure what's going to happen long-term with these facilities and everything. The other option was to try and be a hotel general manager, which actually really appealed to me. The downside is there's no locks on the front door. The upside is the guest is there for 3 days. If they have a really bad time, then they're gone in 3 days for the most part. But that really appealed to me, being part of something really big, and I drank the Four Seasons Kool-Aid to an extent. But then the third option was to try and become a general manager, and really more member-owned. If you had the right single owner, I think you could go there. And
it's not so much the work-life balance, it's the work-life
management. So it really was. I mean,
the
thing for us as a family, so we've got 4 kids. There's a 9-year difference from the eldest to the youngest. And so we're talking about, let's just say 10 years ago. So it would have been a 12-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And I think also, I just encourage everybody, again, kids are one thing, but just doesn't matter if you have kids or not, but if you have a partner, really be having an active discussion with him or her about, what's important to the two of you and where you're trying to get. My wife said to me one day, she said, because she was very successful. She was working corporately. She worked for Four Seasons for years. She moved over to a different resort company, hotel resort company, and was traveling all over the world. And I think she enjoyed some of that. She was fulfilled, but it was tough on all of us. She was going on the road 10 days a month conservatively. And so we had a nanny who was coming in Monday through Friday. Again, we're blessed that we were able to afford this. But I would walk in from work and the nanny would just be going out the door as fast as she could. Like, "All right, yeah, I'm out of here. I've had my fill of the kids for the day." And again, we had pretty good kids. And so I was challenging trying to find the balance of me doing some of the professional things that I wanted to do outside of work and her worrying about just that everything was organized and that we were trying to get everything organized. Somewhere in there, I managed to coach some soccer teams and get to volleyball matches and cheerleading competitions and stuff like that. But I think we just hit us one day. Again, this was our moment, and this definitely doesn't need to apply for everybody. But my wife said, she said, when I grew up, my parents, they were friends with all of my friends' parents, and she said, not only do I not know my kids' parents of my kids' friends, she said, I don't even know who my kids' friends are. And I said, geez, you're the one that's home 2/3 of the time. I said, I have no chance. And we also did some math and just realized we needed to cut some things back in our life. And we made that decision that it would be in the best interest of the family, that if she was focused on the house and the kids and I was focused on the job. And again, I think you have to talk in terms of we. I mean, she doesn't work now, but like everything is we. That's the way you have to be. And then since then, even then, we still have to have the conversations. To your original question about work and balancing that with life, you've got to be anal. I started to say this earlier, like the way I look at every work week being 50-ish hours, and whether I'm here for 50 hours, or whether I'm working some from home or whatever. And I just use that because it's easy math, because then every half hour works out to be 1% of your work time, and then you can even break that down and tell yourself that, okay, every 15 minutes is half of 1%. And I just want to see value in each of those half percents. We try and break it down into 15-minute or 30-minute intervals. And I had a great leader who I worked for when I left Four Seasons, before I rejoined Four Seasons, at a company called JC Resorts in San Diego, and his name is John McNair. And we had courses all over San Diego County. We had hotels up into Orange County. I think we were even outside of San Diego County. Why am I blanking on where we were? But just all over the place. Then we wound up expanding into Mexico, and he was the master of time management. And again, I just tried to pick up things from him, where it was, if there was a thought that I needed to get out to one of my leaders, I wanted to get that to them so they could be thinking about it. So then we had a discussion, they were put thought into it. If you were in the car, use that time to the best of your ability, because we had to drive all over the place, whether it's making calls and for me, sometimes the best use of that time is listening to music or listening to a podcast. It's recharge time. The shortest commute I ever had to a job was when I was in Santa Barbara, working at Four Seasons, but the country club I managed was a little bit away from the hotel. And to give you an idea I'll give you two ways to give you an idea of the commute. Number one, the street that the club was on and where my house was the same street. I could start a song at the club and it would still be playing when I pulled it in the driveway.
Nice.
It seemed nice, but like there's no decompression time. So if whatever was going on at work I was still in it when I got home. And we wound up moving about a year after I'd started there, a little further south, and got a little more house. And who knew that Santa Barbara was wildly expensive? But then now I've got a 30-minute-ish commute, and by the time I get home, like the things have fallen off and they've drifted away. And also being in California was great too from a time standpoint, because in the evenings I could call anybody on the East Coast to catch up with them. If I was leaving early enough, I could maybe catch up with family in South Africa or England. If not, I'd catch up with them in the morning. So yeah, I think you've got to be really anal. This is one of the weirdest things I'm ever going to say in my life, but I love calendars and planning. I could just about tell you what I'm doing. This will be true here in about 3 weeks' time, when I've got like my kids' summer golf tournament schedules planned and all of our stuff. I could just about tell you where I'm going to be on any day from here until probably like late September. I think
Wow.
but you got to commit to it. You got to
Excellent.
commit to it. And then like
Sure.
also give yourself the grace of things change. Something's going to pop up. We've had the mantra too of my wife. There were certain things that each of us could control at work. But you had to be able to say, all right, guess what? Sometimes we're not going to celebrate a birthday on a birthday. And sometimes all these monumental occasions where we don't have all of us together. So we're going to figure it out and do the right thing.
Yeah.
Do my kids, is it good for my kids? I think there's probably stuff that the kids would say is not normal. But again, are they angry about that? I don't know that they're angry about it. I don't know that they celebrate it, but I hope that maybe when they get older, they see some level of flexibility and, you try and do what you think is the right thing at the right time. As long as it's just like anything, just you try and do better, do the best you can with the information you have today, and then do a little bit better tomorrow.
And I think we did that today with the time we had. I thought we covered a lot. And Rob, thank you so much. Jennifer, you have anything to add?
Just a huge thank you to Rob. Thank you for sharing so much. And I think this is going to help a lot of people listening to you. So thank you so much.
And I'll
Really
just,
appreciate
the
it.
last piece of advice, we were talking about rackets pros wanting to make more money. If somebody offers help, and it's not even about money, just about anything. If somebody offers help or somebody puts themselves out there, or if somebody doesn't offer help, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think I shared at the DCA, like when I used to do these webinars, and I would have them at the end of it, I would say, if anybody has any questions, here's my email and here's my cell phone. And again, I can count on very few fingers the number of people that followed up, and just about no fingers the number of people who really carried through with wanting to get help and or ask. And again, I don't know, I'm not going to psychoanalyze, I'm not here to judge, but again, you don't have to, but if you feel like somebody can help you, I've always taken the mantra, again, I stole this from somebody, if you can help somebody, it's not going to take more than 15 minutes of your time, you should absolutely help somebody. Hopefully, again, that'll come back to me someday. And again, I like to think that we can all give back and forth to one another.
That's going to be a sound
Thank
bite right
you.
there. I love it.
No, thank you so much. Really
Thank-
appreciate it.
Take care, guys.
You
Bye.
too.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye.